A cop's worst nightmare, arresting the wrong person, and Sergeant Calloway just made the biggest mistake of his career. The sun sits high in the sky, beating down on the quiet streets of Brookfield, a well-kept neighborhood in Ohio. It's the kind of place where the sidewalks are lined with perfectly trimmed hedges, where morning joggers move in rhythm, and where police patrols are routine but rarely necessary. Sergeant Brian Calloway cruises through, one hand on the wheel, the other resting lazily on the radio. 20 years on the force, and he's seen it all. Or so he tells himself. He's got a reputation, tough, direct, doesn't take excuses. He believes in his own version of justice, and in his eyes, people who don't belong in certain areas always warrant a second look. Up ahead he spots her. A black woman, mid-40s, toned, confident stride. She's jogging at a steady pace, her earbuds in, lost in her own world. Expensive running shoes, sleek athletic gear. She looks like she belongs. But something about her unsettles him. Maybe it's the fact that she doesn't glance in his direction. Most people at least acknowledge a police cruiser when it passes. She doesn't. Maybe it's the car she jogged past, a silver Tesla, parked in a driveway. Did she just come from there? Or is she casing houses? Or maybe it's nothing at all. Still, Calloway pulls over. The tires crunch against the pavement as he steps out. He places a firm hand on his duty belt, not reaching for anything, just making sure it's noticed. His eyes lock on her as she slows down, yanking out one earbud. She's breathing hard but controlled, wiping a bit of sweat from her forehead. She barely looks fazed by his presence. "Something wrong, officer?" she asks, still catching her breath. "Where are you coming from?" His voice is steady, edged with that quiet authority he's mastered over the years. She blinks, glancing up the street before answering. "Home. Just getting in my run." "Where's home?" She tilts her head slightly, something shifting in her expression. "Couple blocks down." "Got ID on you?" There it is. The moment shifts. Her face hardens just a fraction, the casual ease in her posture tightening. "For what?" Calloway lifts his chin slightly, studying her. He doesn't like being questioned. Just need to make sure everything checks out. She exhales sharply, hands on her hips. "You pulled over to stop a woman jogging in broad daylight. Because you think I'm a threat?" He doesn't say yes, but he doesn't say no either. She huffs a short laugh, reaching for her phone. "You know what? Let's just call someone who actually enforces the law correctly." Calloway steps forward. Not aggressively, not violently, but deliberately. "Ma'am, I'm not going to ask again. Show me some identification." Her fingers tighten around her phone. Calloway notices, and in his mind, the situation has officially escalated. But he doesn't realize he's making the biggest mistake of his career. The street is still. The only sounds are the occasional rustle of leaves and the faint murmur of distant traffic. But for Simone Daniels, the world has narrowed down to the man in front of her, the officer standing too close, the weight of his stare pressing down like an unseen force. She knows this routine, knows the pattern, knows what happens when someone like her challenges someone like him. But she also knows her rights. "I'm not required to carry ID while jogging," she says evenly. Calloway shifts, adjusting his stance. "That's so?" "That's so." Her voice is calm, unwavering, but Calloway sees it differently. To him, it's defiance. He glances around. The street is mostly empty, just a few houses with drawn blinds. One or two people in their yards, subtly watching, no one stepping in. "I'm investigating suspicious activity," he says, voice clipped. "What activity?" Calloway pauses. He didn't expect to be challenged like this. "You were running past a home that had a high-value vehicle in the driveway," he says, as if that justifies everything. Simone laughs, but there's no humor in it. "You mean the Tesla?" So now jogging past a parked car is a crime? Calloway's jaw tightens. You're refusing to identify yourself. I'm refusing to be harassed. That word, harassed. Calloway feels something burn in his chest, his authority being called into question in broad daylight, in front of strangers. He takes a step closer. You're resisting my investigation. Simone's expression hardens. I'm resisting nothing. You're abusing your badge and you know it. Her hand twitches near her phone again, and Calloway doesn't think. He reacts. He grabs her wrist. It happens fast, the shift from words to action. One moment she's standing her ground, the next, he's pulling her arm behind her back, metal cuffs flashing in the sun. What the hell? She shouts, struggling against his grip. You're under arrest for obstruction, Calloway says automatically, like he's reading from a script. People stop and stare. A man on his porch pulls out his phone, recording. A woman across the street watches, frozen in place. You're making a mistake, Simone grits out, fighting to keep her voice controlled. Calloway tightens the cuffs, ignoring the eyes on him. You should have cooperated. Simone exhales sharply through her nose. Her pulse pounds in her ears, but her voice is steady when she speaks. You don't even know who I am. Calloway doesn't care. But he should. Because his world is about to come crashing down. The steel of the cuffs digs into Simone's wrists as Calloway tightens his grip, pressing her arms behind her back. Her chest rises and falls, controlled but tense. She's been here before. Not in these exact cuffs, not in this exact moment. But she knows this feeling, the weight of power being abused. Calloway doesn't see the problem. He sees a win. Another suspect neutralized. Another moment where he gets to walk away feeling like he's in control. But the world around him is shifting. A small crowd is forming. A man across the street keeps recording, his phone steady, capturing every second. A woman standing near her mailbox calls out, "She wasn't doing anything." Calloway ignores them. He presses his radio. "Dispatch, I have a 10:15, female suspect, refusing to identify herself. Sending for transport." Simone laughs under her breath. "You really think this is going to go your way, huh?" Calloway doesn't respond. He doesn't need to. The law is on his side. Or at least, that's what he's always believed. Another voice cuts through the air. "Excuse me, officer. What's going on here?" A man in his 50s, well-dressed, with an air of authority that doesn't match the rest of the bystanders. His suit jacket is slung over one shoulder, and his eyes flick from Simone to Calloway. Calloway doesn't flinch. "Sir, please stand back." The man doesn't move. Instead, he looks at Simone, then at the cuffs, then back at Calloway. "I asked what's going on." "She was being uncooperative," Calloway says, his voice firm but slipping, just slightly. The man tilts his head. "Uncooperative?" Simone exhales sharply, shaking her head. "He stopped me while I was jogging. Asked for ID. I told him I didn't need to carry one. Now, here we are." The man looks back at Calloway. "You arrested her. For jogging." She refused to comply with an investigation. The man's expression darkens. "That's so." Calloway can feel the shift. The weight in the air is different. He notices the way people are watching, the way the man standing in front of him isn't afraid. A black SUV pulls up, tinted windows, unmarked plates. The kind of vehicle Calloway knows belongs to someone with pull. The driver's door opens, and out steps Captain Ronald Briggs, Calloway's commanding officer, and he looks pissed. The crowd parts just slightly as Briggs strides toward them, his eyes locked on Calloway. The tension is thick. Calloway straightens, trying to maintain his stance of control, but something feels off. Briggs stops a few feet away, glancing between Calloway and Simone, who is still in cuffs. His jaw tightens, and then he says two words that hit Calloway like a sledgehammer. "Uncuff her." Calloway blinks. "Sir?" Briggs steps forward. "I said, Uncuff her, now. Calloway hesitates. This doesn't make sense. His boss is ordering him to release a suspect. Briggs turns to Simone. I'm so sorry, ma'am. Are you hurt? Simone shakes her head slowly. I'm fine. Calloway's stomach sinks. Briggs exhales through his nose before turning back to Calloway. Do you even know who you just put in handcuffs? The street is silent. Calloway swallows. His grip on the cuffs loosens just slightly. Sir, she refused to identify herself. Briggs steps forward, voice dropping. That's because she doesn't have to. Calloway's heart pounds. The SUV, the way everyone's staring, the way Briggs isn't just mad. He's furious. Simone watches him carefully. Her voice is calm, controlled. My name is Chief Simone Daniels. Calloway stops breathing. She lets it sit, lets him process. And then she adds, voice sharp as steel. And you just arrested your boss. The weight of those words hits like a truck. Calloway's mouth goes dry. He feels the eyes of every single person in that crowd. The cameras recording, the neighbors whispering, the moment caving in on him. But this isn't over. Not yet. Calloway freezes. The words hit like a punch to the gut, leaving him standing there, hands still on the cuffs, brain struggling to process what just happened. Chief Simone Daniels, his boss. The woman he just humiliated in broad daylight, treated like a suspect, like she was some kind of threat, is the highest-ranking officer in the department. Briggs's voice cuts through the silence. I said uncuff her. Now. Calloway doesn't hesitate this time. His hands fumble slightly as he releases the cuffs, stepping back as Simone rubs her wrists. The red marks left behind make his stomach turn. The crowd is silent, but the tension is electric. The phones are still recording. The man in the suit is watching with a look that makes Calloway's skin prickle with something close to shame. Simone takes a deep breath, composed, but there's a sharpness in her eyes that Calloway doesn't miss. She rolls her shoulders before turning to face him directly. You think your badge gives you the right to stop whoever you want? Her voice isn't raised, but it cuts through the air like a blade. You think jogging while black is a crime? Calloway opens his mouth, then closes it. He has nothing. No justification. No excuse that won't sound weak. Simone tilts her head, watching him carefully. I watched you make a decision today. I watched you decide I didn't belong here. You didn't know who I was, and that was all you needed to see me as a suspect. Calloway shifts his weight, his face hot, but he can't break eye contact. Simone steps closer, her voice lower now, just for him. You put your hands on me. You humiliated me. You were ready to throw me in the back of a squad car over nothing. And if I were anyone else, if I weren't in this uniform, you know exactly how this could have ended. Calloway swallows. His hands twitch at his sides. She leans in slightly. How many others have you done this to? That question hits him harder than anything else, because the answer isn't zero. Briggs steps in, his voice firm. Sergeant Calloway, you're relieved of duty until further notice. Hand over your badge and gun. The words sting. Calloway's fingers hover over his belt, his pride warring with the reality in front of him. The moment stretches, too long, too thick with unspoken weight. And then, slowly, he unclips his badge. He places it in Briggs' waiting palm. Then his sidearm. His heart hammers in his chest, but he forces his face to stay neutral. Simone watches him for a long moment. There's no satisfaction in her expression, no smugness, just a quiet, heavy disappointment. She shakes her head, exhaling slowly. You need to take a long, hard look at yourself, Sergeant, because after today, everything changes. Calloway doesn't respond. What could he possibly say? The weight of his choices sits heavy on his chest as he steps away, the cameras still rolling, the crowd still whispering. But what haunts him most isn't losing his badge. It's the realization that today he didn't just make a mistake, he exposed himself, and there's no coming back from that. Calloway sits in his car, staring at the steering wheel. The engine is off. His hands rest on his lap, fingers slightly curled, as if they still remember the weight of the cuffs he placed on her wrists. His badge and gun are gone. His career hanging by a thread. The air feels thick, suffocating. He finally looks up, watching the neighborhood unfold in front of him. The same quiet street, the same trimmed hedges, the same houses that looked so normal just an hour ago. But now, everything feels different. He watches as Chief Simone Daniels stands near her SUV, talking to Briggs. Her body language is controlled, but there's a fire in her eyes that he can't ignore. He sees the way the bystanders watch her, not as a suspect, not as a threat, but as a leader. The weight of what he did settles deep in his gut. For the first time in years, Calloway isn't sure of himself. He's prided himself on being a man of the law. He believed he was fair, that he only acted when necessary, that his instincts were always right. But today his instincts were wrong, and it cost him everything. Briggs finally finishes talking and heads toward his own vehicle. Simone turns, locking eyes with Calloway through his windshield. She holds his gaze for a long moment. Then, slowly, she shakes her head, just once, before climbing into her SUV and pulling away. Calloway watches the taillights disappear. His chest feels tight. He exhales, gripping the steering wheel. A year ago, he would have found a way to justify what happened, would have convinced himself that he was in the right, that she was just another person making a scene. But now he doesn't know. And that's what scares him the most. Power doesn't always come from a badge or a uniform. Sometimes it comes from knowing who you are and what you stand for. Calloway thought he was in control, thought he understood justice. But justice isn't about who holds the power. It's about how that power is used. How many times has this happened to someone who didn't have a title to protect them? How many people have been thrown into handcuffs for doing nothing at all? This story isn't just about one bad cop making a mistake. It's about a system that allows mistakes like this to keep happening. So the real question is, when will it stop? And who's willing to do something about it?